What's up, PlayStation Universe, and welcome to episode 11 of PlayStation Fix. My name is Will Robinson, and joining me this week is Kyle Prahl.
Episode 11? I can't believe we made it this far.
So, we're here this week. What we're going to talk about is something that we haven't done. We got having more time to digest throughout the rest of the year after this fairly substantial title came out. We're finally going to get around to doing our spoiler cast for Fallout 4.
What is Fallout 4?
It's a game. It's a very impressive game.
I'm not familiar with this title.
Yeah, so we both went through the story, at least a version of the story. We'll talk about some of the differences in that. I was going to replay through the ending again, the different ways that I could. I only got around to doing it the one way. So for people that don't know, I'm sure if you played Fallout 4, if you heard people talking about it, there are three kind of factions that are involved mainly in this game. And as the story progresses, you kind of lead towards one or the other, and then that's kind of the one that you ultimately end the story with, is sort of how it goes. I ended with, the three factions are, there's going to be the Railroad, the Brotherhood, and the Institute.
The Institute. Is there an ending for the Minutemen as well, or is that kind of a side thing?
I know that you can side with them for part of the stuff that goes on, like when you're trying to get into the Institute. I know that you can like side with the Railroad with the technology, or you can have them build it, or you can have your Minutemen build it. I had my Minutemen guy build it.
I did have my Minutemen build it as well.
So yeah, I don't know if that'll be one thing that I'm sure that we're going to talk about, because I thought that was something too that I felt was kind of weird, where I didn't get as much there wasn't as much kind of weight in what you did with the Minutemen after you retook the castle, it felt like to me.
Right.
Because every time I went back to Sanctuary, because that's where I had Preston Garvey stationed, because I wasn't using him as my sidekick. Every time I went in there, he'd always just say, like, hey, there's a settlement that's being attacked by ghouls or something like that. And it's just
it was one of the other like nameless faces of the camp going, "We're having a ghoul problem, and we've never met you before.
Pretty
Please
much.
help us."
Even though you run our settlement.
Yeah, even though I own you and give you the bed upon which you sleep.
Yeah, even though there aren't enough beds, when there's more beds than you are, every time I go into my settlement, you complain.
Well, so I can start by kind of like mentioning. So you didn't see the Institute ending, so I can kind of fill you in on what happens there if you continue to say yes to. And if that wasn't clear before, spoiler alert for this entire show. That's what we're doing.
Pretty much.
If you continue to listen, so you reach the Institute, and this happens in everyone's game, and you find Sean, except Sean is now a fully grown adult man. He's in fact considerably older than you, because of the effects of you being frozen and him being taken out before you. Like he leaves the vault before you. So he's since become the leader of the Institute, which has been built from the remains of MIT below the ground. And as you follow along the Institute quests, if you continue to follow Sean's orders and, I mean, literally eradicate the other factions, because that's kind of what ends up happening, is that he views the Railroad as a threat and the Brotherhood as a threat. At the end of my game, as best as I can recall, is essentially Sean succumbing to cancer, I believe. It's revealed somewhere along the line that he has cancer and he doesn't have very long left to live. So he names you the new director of the Institute, and then the final scene of the game is basically him wishing you luck on his deathbed. And I'm sure if I'm remembering, I'm sure there's some exchange where he tells you that he loves you, or you tell him the same thing. At least you have the option. And then it plays kind of that short anticlimactic cutscene that I think is the same for everybody, no matter what ending you get, or maybe it's a little different. So so that's kind of the trail of what happens. You get named the new director of the Institute, and there are no factions left to oppose you. The Brotherhood was destroyed at their airport, and the Railroad was murdered in their sleep below the ground, just in their little cave. You go in and raffle stomp them. All right, so
it doesn't sound like a very bombastic ending then, comparatively.
No, and in fact, it really, it trails off in kind of the worst way. And I want to, just to step back a little bit and clarify. I still think Fallout 4 is great. It started off as maybe my favorite Bethesda game ever. It didn't end up that way, all things said and done.
Yeah, I would still
But
have Skyrim over 4.
yes, I would as well. And but it's still a great game. So I'll frame it like that. But I have the ending specifically is what bothered me, as well as some story choices that were made along the way, or,
Hmm.
or design choices rather, I should say, on Bethesda's part. So it was anticlimactic, like you said. It did just kind of trail off. I believe my final battle was against the Brotherhood. Like we fought. Like the prime massive version of, or rather we blew up the prime version of their Brotherhood armor, their power armor. That was like this massive 5-story tall suit of power armor.
Oh,
um,
okay. That's different from mine. That
oh
didn't happen
really?
at all.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, we go and we assault their main base, and we take, and they have this massive suit of power armor, and you don't get to pilot it, unfortunately. You just blow up the entire facility. And I actually killed Paladin Dance as part of that battle, which is interesting because there's like the way the battle works is that these Brotherhood guys are basically like not teleporting in, but there's just, I mean, dozens and dozens of these guys are swarming in as
Hmm.
you have to kind of protect your men while they're planting the bombs. And just one of the random Brotherhood guys happens to be Paladin Dance. And I wouldn't have even, there's a chance you might not even notice that while you're fighting him. But that was the final mission. So it had impact, I guess, in the sense that it was really epic scale. It was a long mission, but it wasn't the kind of mission where your quest objective is something that you know is going to change the world before you do it.
Yeah.
You think about the way Oblivion ends. You're in Cyrodiil, and God,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
I'm gonna I'm gonna forget the name of the Daedric prince that is the main
Yeah, I
evil.
know. I know who you're talking about. And I'm
Oh,
trying to
it's
remember
it's
now.
an M, right? It starts with an M. It's two, or is it Dagoth or is that a different game? Either way, right? He's a big demon dude,
Yeah.
just stomping through Cyrodiil, or rather the Imperial City. But like that mission felt like a final mission. Like that felt
Right.
like everything in the game has been building to this. His unholiness has come to Earth despite our best efforts, and now we have
Hmm.
to, save the city, or save the new emperor. The way Fallout trailed off, it was just, here is a mission in which I assault the Brotherhood that feels like a mission that I'm just being given because of my faction allegiance. Like,
Hmm.
okay, you pick this one, so by necessity you have to kill these two factions. But then there
Yeah.
wasn't anything else. There wasn't like the Institute is under assault by everyone you've pissed off, or you know,
Yeah.
Sean is about to be murdered and you have to go save the son that you thought was young, but he's actually older than you. Or maybe Sean has to save you. Like, there was no real twist there. There was no real, like, hook of a surprise, compelling thing. It just sort of, you know, step one, step two, step three just kept, all right, now the story is this. Now the story is this.
Yeah.
Now the story is this, and ending. And cut.
Yeah, it
It
didn't even
did.
well, like you said for their past games too. Like Fallout 3 even had the huge end sequence where you're running with like the Brotherhood of Steel, and and they have the gigantic like 10-story robot that's running along the highway and blowing shit up as you're going, and then you get to see your father and stuff. Or is that, I'm trying to think. No, that is, yeah, that's that
Yeah, that's
ending. I was thinking it was New Vegas, but that's another cool ending too. But
yeah,
yeah,
so
just
like
like you see your father, and you in that at the end of 3, and then you talk to him, and then all that happens, craziness happens. But it's a definitive ending, and you feel like you got to the end of the game, and
mhm.
it really does wrap up like that. Like this big moment happened. This is what you were building up to, and you finally got the resolution that you wanted or didn't want, I guess. But it still ended.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like I say, where the Brotherhood mission felt like that was going to be the penultimate act of the story, but it was actually the final one because, and this is a problem I'll jump to in just a second, where I don't think the choices were very well laid out for you. But once I
Hmm.
figured out that I had set myself on a certain path, then I could kind of see the seams of the game structure where it's like, okay, now I need to kill the Railroad, and I need to kill the Brotherhood, and then the story proper will go into its final conclusion. But no, that was really it. Like, you make a
Yeah.
choice, and you're not even really. in my opinion, presented with that choice very well, and then that's just it. That is the end. Your choice is the end, and you just do a couple throwaway missions to sort of seal the deal on that choice.
Yeah, and before we go too far into that and the mechanics of it, I'll say about the ending that I did. I went with the railroad. Basically I got to the same mission of where I was that Sean told me to kill off the railroad, and
Yeah,
like
I'm
that
curious
kind of mission.
what
I just chose
happened
not to
for
do
you
it.
there.
Yeah,
Okay, so
I just didn't do it. There was always a marker over her head, whatever, to Desdemona,
yep.
above her head, and I just unchecked that mission, so I'd ignored it completely, and then I just went with what they wanted me to do. So Brotherhood got destroyed regardless, because screw them.
Yeah.
But instead of how that worked is that I did a mission for them. Like, everything leading up with the Institute was the same. Like, Sean was going to name me the new leader of the Institute.
You did see those scenes, then,
Yeah,
huh?
he talked about that he was dying and all that stuff. But the
So here's what's
railroad... Okay, go ahead.
well, just to remark on the way that you saw all the way up through Sean wanting to name you the director. That kind of is like proof positive of what I think the biggest problem, or the root of this issue was for me, specifically the issue of the choice, is that the entire time you play through the story, we're told that our goal is to find Sean.
Yep.
So whether it's finding Sean or now we've already found him, and so what is he like now? Sean is always the focal point of what I consider to be the quote main story. And even all the way up to that point, like, you yourself saw the part where he wants to name you director, so it's like the game lets you get that far with your conversation with Sean, and so it's that's one half of it, the way Sean's the focal point. The other half is the way you're it's the classic Bethesda model of how the main story just kind of bumps you against the side factions as you go along, like, oh, by the way, you met someone from the Brotherhood, or boom, oh, you've met the Railroad now. And it's like every Bethesda game has kind of been like that, where you stumble upon the side factions as you play the main story. So that, combined with Sean as the focal point, in my mind, just relegated it to be Railroad equals side faction, Brotherhood equals side faction, Sean equals main story. And because of that, and I mean, I could tell I was making the conscious choice to follow Sean's orders, but that just felt like what I was. It felt like what I was supposed to do, and it felt like if I betrayed. Okay, so I listened to everything Sean had to say, right? And but as I was doing that, I felt that if instead I chose to not listen to him and be like, no, I'm not going to kill the Railroad, well, I still felt that I would come back to Sean eventually, and he would just be like disappointed in me or something, because I truly believe that Sean was the main story. And so I was waiting and waiting for something that felt like a branching path, but it just kind of flew right by me because of the way the game had set up the Railroad to be side quests and the Brotherhood is side quests. Because that's the issue for me, is that Sean has important quests, important quests, important quests. But if you decide to disobey Sean, which you did, and you said, well, I don't want to kill the Railroad, I'm going to side with Desdemona, it's tough for me, because the only history I had with Desdemona was just the initial meeting of her, because everything after that is side content. You don't have to go any further with learning who she is, or...
Yeah, and I started doing more of that stuff. So like the mission that kind of happened right before all this was the Battle of Bunker Hill, where you have to go and you have to fight. Sean wants you to go there and to reclaim some of the synths that are there and wipe their memory and like reset them. In that mission, you have the option of informing the Railroad and or informing the Brotherhood if you go there. I informed the Railroad just because I knew I wanted to team up with them from the get-go.
Okay.
Because it was just like, it was at the point where it was like I've had like all the different synth companions, like the people that were there. Some I didn't even know until later on. There's actually a few of them that were completely random people that I never would have found if I hadn't have been as extensive in my searching as I had been. Like if you go back to Vault, is it 101? No, 101's the very beginning. The Vault. Oh, what's the one? The one that's like super clean. 108, I think, is the one. Yeah, Vault 108 is the one that's like in pristine condition, and there's like the people that still live there.
Yeah,
Do you remember that one?
I do remember.
There's a
that
mission,
one, yeah.
if you go in there, you actually can like find this old decayed part of the vault, like behind this locked door,
Oh,
and there's a companion in there.
really?
Yeah, and it's
Huh.
Curie is her name, and she's one of the regular like handy robots, but she's a medical assistant, and all the other doctors have died in that facility, and they were experimenting on that vault to find a cure for like the radiation poisoning and all this kind of stuff that happened. They were experimenting on the mole rats and stuff, and they were
Oh, I
like
see.
exposing. They had like all of these like secret like one-way windows on like all the different rooms and like the market or like the different places of all the different people in the vault and stuff. It was really creepy and it was really well done. But she was in there, and then you do a thing where you help her go back to the memory den and work with the doctor there, and then you put her in a synth body, and then she starts acting like a synth and starts having like more emotions and
Oh,
all these kind of stuff. It was really cool. She's like a really fun companion to have.
yeah. I
So I was
just
really
totally
yeah, and it
missed
was
that.
like it was totally random. Like if I wasn't just as annoyingly persistent as I was going back to that place and wanted to find out secret areas or not secret, but like just continuing things there, then I
What's
would never have
interesting
found her.
is
But
that I can see how meeting her and having her as a companion would shift the way that you feel about the Institute and its objectives.
right, so having
Uh,
her and then having doing all of this stuff like maximizing Nick Valentine all the way up because his story is pretty cool, and then maximizing, uh, gosh, I can't remember his name. He's one of the first deacon from the railroad.
right.
He's a guy there, and then it turns out later on, spoilers, which you should know by now, he's a synth too. If you maximize his stuff, like he reveals to you that he's a synth, and he actually gives you his like recall code
Holy shit.
to like if like he's like if there's ever a time where you think this has to happen, just like you can do this and like reset me. And he then like later on he makes all these snide comments about like how he's like, man, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But it's so like all of this stuff. It was just like, well, there's like all these people have actually like become my friends now. So it's like I'm going to team with the railroad because I think that I'd rather just like have them live happily and not have to worry about the institute.
I have something to blow your mind with just a second about
Mm.
Deacon. Because I was a little lost trying to remember the character, but now I totally do remember this thing. He is actually not a synth.
I figured that's not surprising, but
If
he
you
said that
kill,
he was. But
the reason is if you kill him, and I think this was with Megan, my fiance, trying it for herself. She actually killed him just to experiment and found out that he did not, in fact, have a synth chip inside him. So
well, if you kill synths, they don't always have synth chips.
I believe they do, or at least they're supposed to.
Synth chips? I don't know. Maybe it's not something I paid attention
I
to
don't know if
much.
it's called a synth chip or like an inhibitor chip or a synth something. I don't know.
I believe like
But
synth armor and stuff, but I don't. Huh. Well, it'd be interesting to see.
yeah.
But anyway,
Uh,
for that, like what I was saying before was the Battle of Bunker Hill, that mission where you have the option of doing whatever. I
yes.
informed on the railroad because I just wanted to see what had happened. It literally didn't really change anything in the storyline except like she basically just said like don't kill the or don't like reset the synths that are there, kind of thing. So instead, I killed the courser that was there and that was there with me, and then the other synths that were in there. But the Brotherhood was also attacking there. Somehow they knew about this, so they were attacking there the same time as the railroad, or the same as I was, and the people were defending themselves there. The railroad was defending the synths, and the synths were coming in to attack the Institute ones. So then I just went through there, cleared everybody out except for the railroad people, left the synths there so they didn't get reset. Came back, talked to Sean, and he didn't talk about like any like mysterious ties between the railroad. He talked about like he was basically skeptical of me because the Brotherhood showed up, and he was like blaming me for informing to the Brotherhood for them to come up because how else would they know they were there? Even though I didn't talk to them, I informed on the railroad. So it was like that was just a point where it was like, okay, so no matter what I did with the Brotherhood, they were going to show up and they were going to blame me for that instead of what actually I did.
Oh, I see.
It was just like a weird, like seemed like an inconsistent story type of thing where it was like, and then
Yeah,
then they kind of moved on from that because like I fought against the Brotherhood in this different place in front of this other doctor on one of the missions, so she like cleared my name with being with the Brotherhood, but still nobody suspected me being with the railroad. and anything, all that stuff happened, went on. You find a nuclear reactor during that same mission with the Doctor. You find a nuclear reactor to power the Institute forever, so they can research in peace and not have their worry about energy and all that stuff. Then, like, at that point, I still had the mission to kill the railroad if I wanted to. I didn't. I ended up following the railroad mission where we all infiltrated the Institute to free all of the synths. The original plan was to, like, free some of them that wanted to escape. And the thing turned out to be, like, it was just, like, a full-out assault where everybody got in there and just, like, cleaned out the Institute. Like,
So everyone was dead.
pretty much. Like, everybody was dying and all this stuff. And then Sean was, like, laying in his bed, dying, and he was, like, super pissed. And he's
So
like,
wait,
I can't believe you.
so you actually like go up to his bed and he's in his bed dying and like that is that where the game ends?
Well, you're supposed to go and get to his terminal to, like, unlock some of the doors. Your goal is to get to the reactor and blow up the whole place by, like, setting off the nuclear reactor
Yeah.
that you just installed in front of, like, all of them and you got praised for. So, like, I talked to Sean and, like, my charisma was up maxed. So I was able to go through, like, all of the discussion, whereas, like, I was able to get a code from him to deactivate some of the synths that were fighting back, just so that there would be less people dying, was kind of the thing. And he just, like, let me have that. And he was still, like, super salty, which was, like, obviously makes sense.
Yeah.
Then we went in there, set off the reactor. We all teleported out of there, and we were on top of this, like, skyscraper looking over where the Institute was. And then you push a button, and then there's this big mushroom clouded shockwave, and then you just completely nuked the Institute.
Okay.
And then you just then the game just, like, well, before as you're leaving, though, there was an actually cool thing, and I'm not sure if this was because my dialogue options went through with my charisma so high or not. But the robot Sean, like the boy that you see at the beginning when you first get to the Institute,
Yeah.
behind the glass, he was there. Like, he just, like, showed up as everybody was leaving towards, like, the teleport entrance kind of thing. And he just was, like, there, and he's like, Dad, what's going on? And you're like, what? Like, why are you calling me Dad? And all this stuff, and you go on. And then later on, when you get back to the railroad headquarters, there's a tape that he gives you, and it's from actual Sean,
Okay.
saying that he reprogrammed the kid to make him think that you are actually his father because he wants you to, like, take him with you and basically have him
Oh,
be
geez.
Sean, like, to grow up with him as, like, actual Sean and all this stuff. So it's like,
Well, that just sounds awesome.
Yeah,
That
it was
sounds
like
way better than my ending.
I know, it was a way better ending that way, and I was like, oh, like, I was, like, totally surprised, and I was like, what the hell? I was like, why does this kid think he's my son now when he was, like, totally freaked out before?
I like that because it kind of fits the theme of choosing the railroad, which is let's give the synths autonomy, let's forget that they're synths and just treat them as people, and it's kind of like
Yeah, but that
fits
was,
with
like, that was super weird, though, because Sean did that as, like, giving you fake him to be your son and be raised, where it was like, but the whole time he's just like, synths are just machines and they don't matter, like, they're just servants for us,
like
and all this stuff.
he has a weird change of heart at the
Yeah,
last.
like, right as he's dying or something, I guess, even though he was, like, super pissed at me for what was happening because I, like, blew everyone up or was going to destroy everything he worked for. So it's like, it was just this weird inconsistency with, like, the character, I guess, at that moment. But I liked that. I liked having that as the ending, as that happening.
Right.
But then as soon as it was done, like, Desdemona was like, talk to me on top of the building after the mushroom cloud was there, and, like, just, like, normal missions resumed, like, just saying, like, oh, go talk to this person if you need to do something. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to do anything anymore. It's like,
Yeah, like going right back to it being or seeming like a side faction. At least to me, that was the thing. What is interesting that, how we kind of got on these different paths is that, you met with the companions, Miss Curie, with Deacon, with Nick Valentine, so you were with synths, like, all the time.
mm-hmm.
I found Kate pretty quickly, and Kate became, like, my main girl, and she's, like, the rough and tumble human. Like, she dislikes synths actively. She's mistrustful of them like everyone else in the wasteland. And so because I didn't have too much interaction, like, I liked Nick, but I got used to having Kate with me, and I liked the
Nick
fact
was my
that
boy.
yeah, Nick was cool. Nick was cool. But I kind of had Kate with me in the way that like she had already been a part of some main story events where your companions actually have dialogue and like chime in about the story event as it's happening.
Hmm.
So like she had already at that point was already feeling like kind of a like sort of a main story character light, you know, like sort of someone
Yeah.
who belongs there. So I took her with me the whole time, and then by the time I get to the institute, it was, you know, I didn't really have a strong feeling about where synths stand in terms of do we treat them as robots or as humans, and then I got into the institute and found out okay, the institute created all of them, and so
Hmm.
from the objective pragmatic standpoint, these are all the institute's property, no matter how closely their AI resembles that of like a human and human thinking. So, I mean, I was conflicted about that, and I wasn't like, it's not like I subscribed to that belief 100%, but it was
Hmm.
easy enough for me to kind of just, okay, that's fine. Like,
Right.
it's weird and it's a weird question, but technically the institute manufactured all of you. So when the institute goes out into the world to bring them back, they have a reason for doing so. It was more so, I think, that I just wanted to follow Sean and see what he was doing because I truly believe that like that's what was going to,
Hmm.
I guess, be I guess be the main story. You know, I thought it was the main story, and thinking back on it now, and you know, it's fair to say that I missed it, and I know for some people the choice was a little more obvious. Like they're like, okay, I don't want to do this, and so I'm gonna follow Desdemona instead, like with you
Hmm.
or Brotherhood. For me, I think I missed it because I'm just very used to these kind of open world games presenting your choices like one after the other and being very sort of obvious about it. Like, I guess a different way Bethesda could have done it was Sean says, go here and I don't know, kill the president or something, right?
Hmm.
So that pops up as a quest objective, but then an optional quest objective says talk to Desdemona about Sean's wishes, and then talk to Paladin Dance about Sean's wishes. It's always
Hmm.
that kind of structure where like the game sort of telegraphs and does like, yeah, you can go do this thing, but it's very clear that if you want to go a different direction, you should like get the opinion of somebody else or talk
Right,
to
and
somebody
they
else.
do that somewhat, like in that mission, like I said at the Battle of Bunker Hill, where it's they say like as soon as Sean says like go get these synths back, and it's his optional mission is like inform the railroad and optional inform Brotherhood,
That's
and
true.
I
That's true.
informed the railroad, but then I got blamed for the Brotherhood being there. So that was like the weird thing where it's
Oh, okay, yeah.
like it's like that totally defeated the purpose of like what I thought was going to happen or like the incentive for doing that. It was just kind of a I guess I
Yeah.
saved those people, but also I was going to say I think I did do the whole story with Kate early
Oh,
on
okay.
too. Like I did all that stuff, but it's also important to note that when I got to like the final act of the game basically going off like from the Battle of Bunker Hill onward, my character was level 64, so I had a lot of time like exploring the other characters and finishing their stories.
Yeah.
So I was doing more of the side stuff before, and then that's was like as soon as Kate's mission was done, I just wanted to go back and I did. And really, it was kind of like Nick's storyline that really decided my wanting to side with the railroad because
Hmm.
like Nick just became like such an awesome companion and then just had the real cool complex thinking to his character and like what he was doing and how he was like grappling with the aspect of like knowing that he was based off of an actual person that was done in like these experiments, like an
Right.
actual detective, and knowing that that's not who he is, and he wants to become Nick, like his own. He wants to become someone else, like not be Nick Valentine. And you kind of like talk him through being like, well, you're your own Nick Valentine, and like you don't have to do that. And that's like his whole mission is like you find a guy who became a ghoul that was actually the guy who killed like Nick's girlfriend or wife or whatever it was, and
Oh
he's still
shit.
alive today. And he's like this gangster that's just like bunkered down somewhere. So you go find him and you just finish him off, and then it's just kind of like, well, did that help you? And he's like, well, kind of like it wasn't really like a satisfying thing for him, but it was like it ended the chapter of like that ongoing Nick Valentine that still persisted today and where he could become his own person now.
Right.
So it's like to have that deep of a
That's
like
interesting.
that deep
Really.
of a like thought process on the thing, like just like made him way too human for
Yeah,
that to be like.
that's fair.
So that, I mean, that really was what kind of pushed it over for me to be like all you Institute people are full of shit. I'm gonna help the railroad, even
Yeah,
though they're kind of like still like that was the thing. So this is one of the biggest things that I don't like a lot of the time in RPGs today, or Western ones specifically, where they give you different choices for the dialogue options and they change the thing. It's that most of the time I just dislike the options you have, and I can think of a better way to like in conversation to like make something happen. Like I thought the whole time, like once you got into the position where you were Sean respected your opinion, that he would seek out like your experiences of being in the wasteland, being able to talk to people and understand what happened. And he's like, no, we're just moving on with what we want to do. You're just here. You get to take over, but do exactly what we want you to do. And not like, we know you, like he called me out one time. He's like, we know that I know you work with the railroad and you're like an ally to them. And you have like the option of like being really vague about in response but I was like, yeah, I am an ally with them. And he's just like, well, you need to end that. Not like I wanted it to be some kind of thing where it's like you actually like communicate with each other and then like have like try to solve resolutions in like the wasteland and start building a better tomorrow.
Totally agreed.
And it just like didn't happen in any way at all. It's like, nope, you got to kill everyone that doesn't agree with you. And I was like,
yeah, and I have the parallel example to that, and I think this may even be the same conversation. Like when he said, like, for me, because I didn't have those railroad ties, it wasn't like I think you might be with the railroad. He just pretty much said, we want you to kill the railroad. And one of my options was, no, I don't want to do that. Now, because I thought that Sean is the focal point of the main story, I thought, okay, I'm going to have choices here where I can subtly influence the outcome of events, and I thought this might be one of them, like a big branching moment. So I said, no, I don't want to kill the railroad. That's not an option. Do it anyway.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, well, you know, that sucks. That felt deflating to see that. It's the Nick Valentine stuff is really interesting. Like I definitely am interested to have him be my main companion when I go back to play the game, presumably when mods come to console, which, you know, Bethesda said is going to happen, but we just don't know when. Probably, hopefully, first half of this year. But yeah, I'll definitely check that out, and it makes sense why, you know, why our viewpoints were so skewed there.
So like that's something that they do really well, but that's something that's not apparent when you're playing the game. It's just something that you come across as you play the game. If you play it a lot, if you play more of the game before you play the story.
Yeah.
Really. So like that's really what dictates a lot of that going on. So, but also I just want to say before actually a couple different points. So one, where you keep saying about how you were focused on Sean as being the main focal point of the story going forward. I thought the same way going up to the point until you discovered that Sean was alive and he was this old man that was running the Institute. Like after that kind of like first hour or so after that happened and you're kind of like understanding what's going on, they send you on a couple of random missions, that just like this main story kind of like ended for me there. Like the main like that main arc was like, okay, they found Sean, like that was like the main kind of goal of the story was met, and now it's kind of moving on a different direction. So like, that just kind of ended to me, and then it became this like trifecta of like choices after that. So it's like,
okay, that makes some sense.
So that's kind of how I played it afterwards.
It never really did. Obviously, for me, that's where we differ. Is that I just I don't know, kind of became, well, you know, part of the thing about it is that, and this goes back to our experiences leading up to that, you might have been more predisposed to not have the same loyalty I did to Sean because of all the time that you'd spent with synth companions and the perspective you had about those guys. Whereas for me, it's like I didn't have any defining experiences about the synth, so I guess you could say that I was a little more my thoughts about them were a little more receptive to whatever Sean was going to tell me. I was going to be like, okay, that's fine, because I still think that you're the person I should be sticking around to find out what happens with you, and I don't have any real strong thoughts about synths, so sure, whatever you
right. And like once I found out he was an old man, like I just immediately assumed that like he literally, like pun intended, was institutionalized, like literally was.
Yeah.
So it's like
he was.
Okay, you're completely skewed in your viewpoint now because you have no grasp of what the wasteland is actually like and like the interactions that have been happening with the synths. So it's like from like when I discovered that, I was just kind of like, okay, I'm not nearly as connected to you as a character, or as like as needing to save you, because you've already lived your life, basically. So,
The
but
other
before we just kind of jump in, it was like the first time you actually get into the institute, like holy crap, that was such a cool
Isn't
thing.
that awesome?
Just like I
Yeah.
mean, just being in the wasteland for all that time, and just being there and drudging through all of this crap in the world and all the bad things, and then you're just like here. It felt like a totally different game. Like it
It
felt like
did.
you're in Portal, kind of.
It
Like
did, and it was such a it was such a powerful emotional moment to
yeah,
just to see Sean behind the glass initially and not know
and
yet
like
that that
freak
was
out. It's
oh my
like
God, that was so intense. And then
that.
I
Yeah.
mean to have the adult Sean walk in was a total mind fuck. I mean it was like for
Mm.
me, I mean you can probably sort of see it coming if you piece together the differences in years, but it was never a sure enough thing for me where I was really expecting it. So it was still like a oh wait a minute,
Hmm.
you're Sean, what?
I kind of
What?
assumed that he was fully grown, well, old if like fully grown if not old, like
Hmm.
getting that. So it wasn't like super surprising to me, but it was kind of like, okay, so they like, oh yeah, he's old. I was like, that's kind of cool. Like I wasn't totally expecting it, and then because like, well, part of it they throw you off because you see this young Sean like behind the
Yes,
glass,
true.
so it's like then they just like take like even if you are expecting him to be old, they just like they have like young Sean there, and then it's just like
And
it's like
then
oh
you're
shit,
like, oh.
he's young, and then it's all of a sudden he like kind of like he just like shuts down, and you're like what? It's like
I was
what
like,
did you do to my
oh,
son? And it's like oh okay.
what are you trying to pull over my eyes, Bethesda?
Yeah, so that
Yeah,
was a good kind of like bait and switch that they did there because I was half expecting when I got there that he would be old and like fully grown, and then he was there as a kid, and I was like, wait, what? Wait, no, and then he's like, then he just like, but then he looked like before he even reveals that he is your son too. When you start talking to him, if you just like notice the facial features of it, they actually made him look kind of similar to the starting character model. I don't know if it changes based off of what your character model is if you adjust your like the face of your main guy to have him match like father son kind of
yeah, I don't know
for looks,
either. I would
but
I would imagine not if I had to guess,
he
but
looked similar to my characters. I didn't change like the facial structure much. I changed like the hair and stuff, so
Mhm.
he looked similar to that, so that wasn't surprising to me when he started talking. But
Well, I just thought the role reversal, besides being an awesome reveal, was also a cool emotional core to kind of carry that third act because it really did, for me at least, totally flip the script on I was the father in the wasteland trying to find the son so I can care for him and cover for him, and then you
hmm
suddenly encounter the son and find out, well, you are now the less experienced of the two or the less knowledgeable of the two, and this guy has success and he's built things and he's created this team, and so he it was just interesting to kind of be like, well, now my son is my father
hmm
in this weird sense, or is old enough to be my father. And so how do I feel now as more of almost like a son role? It was weird. My mind kept bouncing back and forth.
yeah.
Well, am I the young kid being taken care of, or am I the dad watching his son grow the institute and be proud of him? And
hmm
it was weird being torn. It was almost like having your mind split in two different sort of things that I was role playing simultaneously.
Yeah, and then there was actually just thinking of just well, that was the same thing. It was like how he was fully grown and how he was old and been through a lot within the institute. But it was an interesting thing. That was one of the frustrating things in the dialogue that happened or whatever. Which I guess I mean it made sense because he had only been in the institute really his whole life, and he was going through this. But there was like the discussion that I had with him during like talking about the railroad and not like and being allied with them or whatever, and that some dialogue option came up where I talked about something that they were doing or being allied with them, and he was just like saying about how that he knows what the lengths that those people will go to, so they're like not any good basically. And
Right.
it's like, do you not know what the entire wasteland thinks of you people for like
Yeah,
abducting
exactly.
random people and then replacing them with like it's like you can't take the high road on this
Right.
conversation here. So it's like this
And it was
weird.
and it was tough it was tough to support him because in some of those moments I thought it was well done how you having seen the Wasteland perspective and he's never been up there, it's like it did make it difficult to side with him on certain things, and like
Yeah.
he
Well,
did come
that's
off
what
as
it
crass.
showed his immaturity as like that was the thing. It was like it made him seem like a kid at that point. And he's
Hmm.
talking because he was just in the institute the whole time, and it was like it was just so
Yeah,
weird.
becoming indoctrinated,
Yeah,
basically.
so it was just like an interesting thing. One thing that was cool though, if you do the ending that I have, I don't know if the Brotherhood does the same, allows you the same kind of access that happens. If you go through with the railroad and you wipe out the institute, you know the lab area where they have like the synthetic gorillas behind the glass.
Yes.
They raise the glass up and the gorillas come to fight you.
Oh, that is cool.
And you can pick up synthetic gorilla meat from their bodies. So
What?
I have two synthetic gorilla meats. So it's
Oh my
like
God, that's
really
awesome.
awesome, unique item that I put in my meat locker with my Deathclaw meat and all that stuff.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if there was some obscure recipe in the game that used the
God, that would be
synthetic goat meat.
amazing. But it was just like this is just so cool. I was like, okay, that's awesome. It's like a fun little thing where they
That
threw
is
that
really,
in there.
yeah, that is really sweet.
Yeah, so that
Yeah,
made me
that's
super
awesome.
happy.
Yeah, I guess my final thoughts on the choice matter is that, as I mentioned, it was presented very differently than Western RPGs have typically presented those choices. You are right when you say that there was kind of that moment where it's like optional, tell so and so about the plans, optional, tell so and so
Hmm.
about the plans. But I guess because the arc of the main story had sort of been positioning those people as totally side factions, it with me personally, it just didn't click that was the moment where I should have just paid a little more attention. And so I was
Yeah.
always expecting this big branching thing to happen, and when it didn't, that was very anticlimactic. And then, of course, I find out later that I just missed it more or less. But yeah,
Hmm.
it was also weird how like some of the. I guess a small part of that you could give credit to Bethesda for going a different route and kind of making it where they did subvert my expectations a little bit because I wasn't expecting a game to be nuanced about the choice. I just thought like, it was going to be as blunt and as clear as ever, but they did actually do something a little bit different with the arc of it. I think where the extreme they might have taken that to is that sometimes, going back to what you said about the way dialogue choices are presented and how you might have a different solution or how it's not clear what's about to be said. Like I I feel like some of the choices in the game were a little bit nested in the conversations, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Like, what would be an example of that? It's like a choice that matters in the story isn't really presented to you until a few steps, like a few other optional steps within a conversation, and like that's hard to really discern like how you should be answering things. And then there are other times when it's like, all right, I tell Sean I don't want to do this. Well, why even give me that option if it's literally going to change nothing? It doesn't change how he feels about me. It doesn't change
Hmm.
the mission I'm about to do. It's just a chance to self-express myself that's just arbitrary, you know? No, I don't want to do that. Well, that's nice, but go do it anyway.
Yeah, pretty much. And there's a lot of times too that I've found in not just in Fallout, but in other games too, where it's just like if you have multiple choices for a response and dialogue, there's a number of times that I found where I pick an option and it's conveyed in a completely different inflection or what I thought was how it was going to be
Yes,
said, and it
agreed.
totally screws up your conversation that you had.
It does.
And it's
And I thought Fallout 4 was definitely on the worst end of games that have used dialogue choices in terms of how many it kind of got wrong or how many that um,
yeah.
it sent you on a different path. I was thinking about that when you first brought up the topic, and I think, a way that games the trap that Bethesda kind of fell into is that the four dialogue options were more based on the character's tone than the actual content of the response. Like there was always
Hmm.
a "that's awesome" option or a "that sucks" option, and then there was a sarcastic, joking option and a non-committal option. Like that kind of felt like,
Yeah,
for the
there's always
most
the
part,
standard four. Yeah.
yeah, the standard four. When I think a more effective way to do it would be to have four or even five responses that always fit a certain
Hmm.
character trait. Like this is the, to kind of bring it back to like almost the D&D model. This is the rogue response, or this is the hero response. This
Hmm.
is the chaotic response. Like kind of follow that model more so that at the very least you always kind of know what your response is going to say about your character, and you can kind of decide consistently these are things that my person would say, or this is the attitude I would have. Yeah, I just feel like when you start to
Hmm.
get into the thing of like, oh, no matter what square is, it's always going to be sarcastic,
Yeah.
or no matter what triangle is, it's always going to be a woohoo. And it starts to simplify things, and then also you run into that case where it's not what you wanted it to be.
And that's what I've loved. I can't. I'm trying to think of the games that actually did this, but there are games that I've loved that do that, and it takes you off guard, where they don't have those scripted to the buttons like that, where they change. Like they have different options, but you
Oh,
basically just have
right.
to choose what you would want to say. Not just like you can't just assume that that's like the good response or the
Hmm.
bad response or the sarcastic. Like they have them like constantly kind of rotating or like changing in different spots. So it's like it
Yeah,
keeps
for
you on your
sure.
toes. So you actually have to just make a decision, not just be like, this is the way I'm going through it right now. So it gives you more. It makes it more personable, I guess, when you're going through it.
Yeah, that
Just
sounds
kind of
legit. I don't think I would mind that. I think I might actually kind of like a game that is like doesn't really put the same responses in the same places, like actually forces me to read them and kind of be like, oh, that's the roguish response, or that's this, that, or the other.
yeah.
Make
So I like
analyze it
that
a
a
little
lot.
bit more.
Yeah, I think out of the two big RPGs this year, I think The Witcher did the dialogue choices better in
Hmm.
general. Just for the conversation, it seemed like it made more sense in the context, and it wasn't just like you were saying. It wasn't just trying to mirror the character or like the emotion that the character should be having if they said this thing or something. It was
Yeah,
more.
it's not just like here are four versions of Geralt's voice. It's like here are four versions of Geralt's personality. And another thing I think The Witcher did really well is there were moments in the game when you had, okay, very clearly, yes and no are in the top corners. Of course I don't exactly remember how they're laid out, but you have choices that are more binary, like yeses, nos, or maybe later, and then you've got others where it's more nuanced, and you
Hmm.
actually have to read and be like, okay, these are the different ways I could respond to this. And as far as I know, there are no time limits enforced on The Witcher's dialogue, so you're just, well,
There are
not sure isn't
some.
followed either. Oh,
There's
is
some.
there?
Yeah, there's a few instances where you have to make a quick decision.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, you have like 10, 15 seconds or something, and there's like a meter that's winding down. You have to pick.
I guess in general, I agree. Either it was like the way, The Witcher's descriptions were a little longer when you were selecting the options, like a little more
Hmm.
detailed, or just maybe the writing was better, which could be, which could very well be the case also.
Yeah.
I can't remember. There was maybe once when he went a little bit off script and it wasn't quite what I intended, but like it was still within the
Hmm.
realm of what I was trying to get at. So
Yeah, and it all felt like it made sense with the character, or like it was like it was a good way to put it, where it was just like his different sides of his personality, or like pretty much it was just kind of like how we felt during that time of conversation. Pretty much, it's like when if you whatever your response you gave, it made sense in the context, where
exactly
it
within
wasn't
the
just
universe.
like yeah, it was some kind of jarring in Fallout 4 where with the main character either like he'll either like have a discussion where he can be you have the sarcastic response and he's like about Sean or something and he's like trying to find him or he says something just kind of like yeah that helps a lot or whatever kind of thing, but then you pick the other one instead or something where he's like just wants to know where Sean is and he just like screams like really like hysterically.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, or you just pick like the question one, basically the triangle, where he's just like, "Oh, do you know where he is?" Instead of like, "Where's Sean?" And it's just like, but he does like his body doesn't move, like he doesn't have any like body animations. I think that's something that's like The Witcher does way better versus Fallout, where it was like there's actual like full body animations if there's like if he is getting more into the what he's saying instead of just like having his head kind of tilt a little bit like in Fallout 4 while he's like screaming or something, and it's just like it just looks goofy.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like our thoughts on the narratives and the ending and how that was handled. I think like Fallout was going to be one of my favorites, except for the way it trailed off. And I mean, even in your ending, it seemed like you were a little disappointed with the anticlimactic of it. I really like the way you described
Mm-hmm.
how you realized the main story had ended when Sean was old, and then it became a competition of side factions.
Yeah.
Like, but I guess even if I had noticed that model, I think I still would have been disappointed in the lack of a true sort of epic arc ending and more just story's over. Pick the one you want to live with for the rest of the game because the others are going to get locked out.
Yeah.
Which is a little disappointing too. I get it. You know, you have choices that matter, and you can't do everything with one character. But like, to, I didn't feel like the motives of those factions couldn't exist in the same world. You know, like I could
Yeah.
see maybe the Institute and the Railroad not being able to coexist, but it would have been nice to have at least one of the side factions that I could have embarked upon at
Yeah,
the end of the game,
or
and
it would
not
have been
be
nice just for them to like as soon as the game got finished, it just automatically reloaded you before the final mission happened and before all this stuff.
Oh
Like
yeah,
that's I mean this is a game that I would have actually liked that to happen at, or not just having me show like having it, the whole big thing happen and to be done, and now it's just the railroad for me, and they're just like I was like, well, that was pretty intense. Talk to
yeah,
this person if you want to do something else. And I was like, well, it's like,
now you're just left with like the randomly generated
yeah,
quests
now you
that
just
give
jump
you
back
something
into the
to do.
world. Yeah, and
Right,
just kind of
exactly.
dick around. So it was just, yeah, it just seemed kind of an empty ending to it. Like there were cool moments in it, but it didn't feel like a true ending. Like it did feel like it wasn't like this is it, this is the ending to the game. It just really did feel like an ending. Like it didn't feel like you were being given the value. Your choices weren't valued or anything like that. It was like, oh, you went this way.
Right.
This is what happens. Like you can try. We want you to go back and play the other ways. And it's like, well, what if I
Yeah,
wanted it to end this way? And it's like,
and other than completely cutting off the heads of the other factions and like they're not around in the world, the effects on the world did not seem as dramatic to me as say like Skyrim's main story where like there's just a town that is not the same, you know what I mean, or just gets destroyed effectively
yeah,
depending on what you do. And I guess that was technically a side mission as well because it's a Civil War storyline. But
hmm
no, I just my general sense of the world state after the story was completed is that other than a few some of the ambient dialogue like I think it was Piper, the reporter,
oh
was
yeah,
like, I can't believe you sided with the Institute. And now every time I run into her, she says that. But that's like
huh.
one of the only things that has changed about the world other than being locked out of the factions. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you there. It didn't feel like it had the kind of meaning to me personally and also to the game world in terms of why did it matter that I chose this.
Right, but like as an RPG, it's definitely one of the best that's
Yeah.
come out like ever.
Yes. Yeah,
Especially for
that's
Western, it's easily like, boy, I mean, for Bethesda games, I would put it well as like an RPG itself, not counting just like the kind of story and stuff for that. It basically literally would just kind of come down to taste whether you like fantasy or like the post-apocalyptic setting for them.
I
I
think
would
so,
say I would
yeah.
say Skyrim and Fallout 4 are basically at the top.
Well, here's the thing about it. We can go back, if a listener wanted to, they could go back to like our first reactions podcast about the game because
Yeah.
a lot of what I said there still holds true all the way through like the 80 hours that I played after saying that. There's only a couple exceptions. Like I was a maybe I'll just get those out of the way before, we dive into what we liked about the game and like
hmm
I thought when all was said and done, the variety of armor and the way armor felt was pretty disappointing.
Yeah, that was
It was
lacking in a lot of ways.
other than being just aesthetically hideous and all of it kind of looking the same, the naming schemes were also confusing. Like you could have armor with the exact same name that looks the same and the stats are different. And like it's
Yeah.
clearly of a higher tier, but there's no way to tell that unless you're digging through a menu looking at it. So something went wrong
Right.
in the armor tiering system and how those items were classified because it just got more confusing as I went along toward the end of the game.
Yeah,
Uh,
and the weapon leveling was kind some of I mean it was similar in that way too. Some of the weapons had like this just had got better as you got like more levels. But it just like I hit there was like a long time ago during my leveling where I like hit a wall with weapons and they just did not get better. For like the last like 20
yeah.
25 levels that I've played, they just don't get better.
Here's
And
I
it's
hit
just
a
kind of
I hit a similar point that had a little bit more to do with the skills I accrued. So like I I got a Gauss rifle pretty early on through a random drop,
Hmm.
and later I got a Gauss rifle that deals. It's like every time you fire it, it's shooting 2 rounds at once. So it's
Hmm.
essentially double damage on top of a gun that's already ridiculous.
Yeah,
So
that's all I used in the final part of the game, and I just one shot at everybody.
yeah,
Made it a
yes.
little less climactic, but it was.
Yeah, and that's part of the issue. So on top of that, I had some of the agility perks decked out for stealth, so that when I have a suppressor attached to the Gauss rifle, which
Hmm.
I won't even get into how ridiculous that thing looked, but like that is also doing an additional 50% damage. So basically, it was like, I'll grant it, this happens in a lot of RPGs where you build your character a certain way because you can see that that's going to be an awesome path, but it's like I built it that way, and nothing in the game was a challenge anymore. So
Hmm.
like for one thing, I would say I think the game is tuned a little too easy on the normal difficulty, and even when I bumped it up to hard and very hard, my Gauss rifle combo just it was unbeatable. You know, I just had
Hmm.
to stay far enough away to not get smacked around, and I could kill virtually anything. So. And I'm not sure what the answer to that really is because I built my character in that way, but I think it's maybe just I don't know. Checks and balances. You know, there's ways to have the world. I guess the issue for me was that by the time the gun stats capped out for me, like you did for you, they said you just kept getting stuff of the same quality. That almost didn't matter anymore because I was at a high enough level where enemies weren't getting any stronger, and my Gauss rifle was already more than enough to take them down. So I
Yeah,
stopped caring about gun drops because of my crazy awesome Gauss rifle, not
right.
necessarily because
And
the
I didn't
drops.
really like. I hardly ever used that gun when I got it, just because there wasn't a ton of ammo I was picking up for it.
Hmm.
So the only time I really ever used it was for the end of the game, just because I had like a little over 200 rounds, and I was like, well, this is the end of the game, so I might as well use it. Because I didn't know if it was going to reset me back to the like before the last save happened or what was going to go on. But I figured that if there was ever a time to use it, it'd be now. So that was when I did. But otherwise, I was just using like the like a modified combat rifle for a while, and then that started feeling like it was totally worthless, which got really disappointing, even though it's fully leveled up or fully modded. And then I started using a modified assault rifle, and that was actually doing pretty good damage. But still, it was just like it felt like everything capped up. It
Hmm.
got capped off later on, and it was just kind of there was an incentive to keep exploring. But there's actually for good in terms of comparing quality of RPG within Bethesda. I would say that in terms like for character building, Skyrim beats the hell out of Fallout 4 for modifying a character to play a certain style in a certain way. Because like Fallout 4 just does not like even if you do like all stealth and stuff, you're still using the same weapons.
Yes,
Like
and I think,
it's
and I
just
think,
there's no specialty in weapons. You just can use whatever.
yeah, yeah, and that's a tough one for me because I was an early advocate of the skill system, and I liked because it made sense within the realm of the world that if my guy was good with a shotgun, he can probably fire a sniper rifle competently. But I do
Hmm.
agree that it's an unfortunate consequence of a game that's all about guns that like you can't really
Yeah.
well I guess for me the problem is more that when I make a new character, even if I deck them out with completely different specials and like you have all these perks which are very different from your other perks, it's still going to feel the same playing him. It's just I'll be
Right.
dealing, I'll play a slightly different way. Like I might be, more of the juggernaut with my power armor versus sneaking. But like
Hmm.
at the end of the day, no matter what character I make, I'm still going to be firing guns, and I'm probably going to gravitate toward the same guns that I like to use every time.
Yeah, pretty much. But like Fallout 3 and New Vegas did a better job at gun specialties, I feel, compared to this one where it's like even if you invest all your perks early on into just like big guns or you do it into rifles or handguns or whatever, it doesn't feel like you're gaining that much damage between
Hmm.
them. When like it just didn't feel like that when I was upgrading stuff. And in 3 and in New Vegas, it really felt like you were like seriously investing like one of your valuable points into whatever you picked. And it was a noticeable difference if you like put all your points into rifles or put all your points into handguns or whatever. You really, really noticed it,
Mm.
and it just didn't feel that way in 4 to me.
No, it
Not to say
doesn't.
that it really like held back the gameplay, but it wasn't as customizable. They simplified it a lot more in this version.
Yeah, I guess that
So
was for me is that I like that idea in theory. Like in theory, I like that. Oh, I can use whatever gun I want. Cool, I can use everything. But then it just ends up I just end up picking one or two anyway because they're so bombastically better than everything else
hmm
because of the weird, and it's tough. I hate saying that because I actually really liked the system where some legendaries you can get have these really awesome stats that are unexpected, and you're like, oh shit, this Gauss rifle is better than every other Gauss rifle in the game.
hmm
But yeah, I guess what started off in my first 10 or 20 levels is me like, sweet, I can have a revolver now. That's fun. All right, tired of that, and I'll switch to a sniper rifle. That was awesome, but then it ended up just being I had one or two guns that I used anyway, and so
hmm
then it was like, okay, did I like the freedom of gun choice more, or did I like the the reward of investment from the previous games? And I think reflecting on it, I probably would take the reward you feel from investing points.
Yeah, and yeah, and it was just like their choice that they wanted to make for this game for the leveling system, which is, I mean, it's fine and it's not a bad thing at all. It just doesn't give the same kind of satisfaction
Hmm.
going into it. But overall, still, Fallout 4 is one of the best RPGs that I've ever played,
Yep,
especially for
I'd say
today. Story isn't as strong
it's
as
definitely one of the
others.
best Western RPGs that I've played.
Yeah, story is not as
Nope,
strong, but it's just like
but the world
that's not why
feel,
you play it. Yeah,
yeah, the world building, the art design, the art direction, the
yeah.
broader narrative themes, how the world got to this state and what each little pocket of
hmm
humanity is doing. Like the world building just as a whole is
Yeah,
fantastic.
and the
And on top of
characters
that,
and
the
companions.
shooting, yeah, it's like the shooting is great, it feels great. The perks are interesting. Um, you know, the crafting system I loved, the settlement building system I loved. I loved making those modifications to weapons.
hmm
Again, I come back to the fact that like, oh, I wish that there wasn't a couple weapon choices that were so compelling to me that nothing else made sense. But in general, I thought the way you scavenge for things in this post-apocalyptic world made so much sense, and the way you
Yeah,
combined those pieces just felt so right to me. Whether you were building things or modding things, whatever you were doing, it just clicked so well.
yeah. The whole actually making every piece of like loot matter, or any like random junk pieces matter in this game, just gave a whole new dynamic to it, and
Yes,
made the
absolutely.
building just that was one of the things is like my sanctuary settlement is like one of the most satisfying things that I've ever done in a game. Just like the feeling of like completing it
I
and
love that
having it
so
done, like
much.
it just felt so good. And it was like I instantly, it was like one of the only times that I've regretted like that I wanted a game to be online because I just wanted to show people
Yeah, for
the
sure.
settlement after it was done. So
Well, I had fun for the first week having an impressive settlement before anybody else got their hands on the game, but
yeah.
yeah, and then it, watch things blow from there. But I'm still proud of the way my settlement was able to
hmm
really feel like it belonged in the world, like something that a group of 18 people could theoretically build with the tools available to them.
Yeah, I might just walk through my settlement for the video for this podcast just for my
Yeah,
own
it's a good idea.
vanity. Throw it on
Yeah, for
here.
sure.
My armory is something that I'm most proud of, where it's just like this open three-tiered, like three-level open roomed thing where you see like a whole like the one wall just filled with power suits
Mm,
on three levels.
that's nice. That
It
does sound cool.
makes me feel really happy. Um,
Yeah, so I mean that's I got all the negative stuff out of the way, but I think I'm right there with you. I do think Fallout 4 is what some of Bethesda's best work.
mhm.
There are things it unfortunately takes a misstep in, but the thing about the missteps is that they weren't for lack of trying. Like there's nothing stale in the game.
Mhm.
There's nothing that was like, oh, I didn't like this in Skyrim and they didn't change it, Like all the narrative things, it wasn't my cup of tea, and I think they've, you know, hopefully with some of this people reflecting back on the story, they've maybe seen that the story wasn't as impactful as they wanted it to be. So then it's a question of, all right, how do we make that better next time? Have more of an adventurous arc and some choices that are more clearly delineated. So fingers crossed for the future installment, because I think if anything, Fallout 4 has shown that they are willing to both improve on the model with things like crafting and settlement building, but also, change things that were already fine. Like if you had a main story in Fallout that was kind of like Skyrim's with just a series of main story quests, like I think that would have been fine, but they weren't willing to just
Hmm.
let it be fine. They thought, well, let's do something kind of different in terms of choices
Yeah.
and that, and we'll see how it's received.
What would have been great in this game is if they did take us kind of a note from the Elder Scrolls games, and like in Skyrim, if you had different groups like the guilds that you could do something like different factions in for, like if they really did make like the Brotherhood and the Railroad into faction, like into guilds where they had their own quest lines and they did their own things and they led to a certain point where they just gave you really good gear or gave you like rewarded you for spending time with them, but they didn't it didn't come to this crazy ultimatum where you had to blow everyone up but them.
Yeah.
So I think that would have been a cool way to handle it in the future. But well, clearly they would have had to change kind of how the story worked out if they would have done it that way. But I think that would be something that'd be cool to see in Fallout, like since it is a post-apocalyptic setting where people are kind of rebuilding society. It'd be natural for the groups to join together like they do, but to have it be more specialized groups like that, and like they were in Skyrim, where you have the Warriors Guild or the
Yeah.
Mages Guild and that kind of stuff, would be fun to see.
Yeah, I mean, typically when you have, this kind of dramatic decision to make in a game, more often than not, the people that you have to choose between, or the world views that you have to decide which one is right,
Hmm.
those groups are introduced as part of the main story, and you're given sufficient time with each of them, and then usually they come into conflict with each other, or, party members disagree with each other, whatever the example is. I think for me, that would have made more sense because getting to know the railroad and getting to know the Brotherhood was completely optional. But if you had had
Hmm.
some sort of pull and tug between different characters, that okay, I grew to like this person, oh, met this guy and I grew to like him, met this third person, grew to like them, and then they make you choose, well, that actually means something because you had time to, like, every player had the same experience where they got to know the person, and so everyone's making a choice on equal footing, I guess you could call it. Like, we all
Hmm.
have the same amount of information, and so now it's about expressing yourself with the choice you make and who do you think is right.
Right, and there
No,
was one thing too that I kind of go back and forth on in my mind about this, but I think overall I still think that I didn't like how many companions there were in Fallout. Like
sure.
there were just a lot
Yeah,
of them,
yeah.
and it just kind of it either made you feel like you missed out. Like I mean, like Piper, like I never used her on anything. She just like automatically got thrown in, and I was like,
Yeah, me either. I
I
didn't.
just ignored her completely, and she was just stuck. That was the one thing too. I could not. You should be able to send people like Piper and Nick Valentine back to Diamond City. Like they should just be able to be there when you're not using
Oh, it
them.
got so
And then
hard
they
to keep
just
track
stay
of
at
some of those
Sanctuary,
things.
and I was like, "Why are you at Sanctuary? Like you don't. Why are you in my garden? Just go
Oh
home,
man,
work at your paper." And
don't
it's
even
like,
get me started on some of the finer points of settlement expansion.
God,
Like, oh, okay, I want to set up some trade routes. All right, you go here. All right, well now I want to change.
yeah.
I want to reassign you. Guess I
And
better find you out in the world.
they don't even tell you
And
where.
just
Like
cross
yeah.
my fingers.
And half the time, that would be something that'd be nice to highlight people to know what their job was in that settlement. Because half the time, it's like you're reassigning somebody on a trade route, and it's like, well, they were already assigned to a trade route, but you didn't know that, so you have to assign somebody else to that trade route. Well, they were doing the garden.
Yeah.
Well, you got to assign somebody to that. It's like,
Or it's like,
oh my
or it's like
god.
I want to, or it's like I want to assign you to crops, but I don't know what crops you're already on because I can't fit you and the crops in the same frame.
Yeah,
Like
really.
or are you assigned to that guard outpost? Don't know because I can't see it from here to see whether it's lit up or not.
Yeah. That's
Just yeah, like brutal when you try to get into the finer points of settlement expansion.
Yeah, but
And
they.
just some of the things should just horribly explained and
Yeah.
or not explained at all.
So they've got really strong building blocks for the next Fallout. And
Yep.
if they have stuff like this in the next Elder Scrolls game, my god.
Oh Jesus, yeah. I've been dreaming about that since I first dove into settlements, being able to kind of have these big plots of land where you could set up a small town. Decide
Yeah.
where the houses are, where the shops are,
Oh,
defend
that'd be so
yourself,
cool.
actually defend yourself from attack, not just once in a great blue moon, a single
God,
raider tries to
so
sneak into your base and you've got
so annoying.
laser turrets trained on him.
Yeah, that was like the thing is like defending, having to defend them, and like half the time, like I had those notifications pop up when I'm in the middle of like a main quest line mission,
Hmm.
or like during dialogue scenes, and it's like, well,
It's like,
I can't leave this place. Like I
yeah.
literally cannot leave here to help you.
And I just never, I mean, like in the entire time I played, I racked up 80, 90 hours of game time.
Hmm.
My settlement that I initially started building it because I'm like, well, if it's going to get attacked, I want to have this kick-ass settlement and I'm going to, actually make some sweet moments out of this. Well, I
Yeah.
got attacked three times in the entirety of my gameplay.
God,
And
jeez.
two of those times, this, like, the attacking party, like, the NPCs in my settlement knew they were coming before I did, so I was just usually like, "Wait, everyone's running. What's happening?" Oh, and I
Yeah,
would sprint after them. By the time I got out there, this whatever was already dead.
pretty
I mean, it
much.
was the most. It was, you want to talk anticlimactic? That
Hmm.
shit was the most anticlimactic battle ever. Put the ending to shame. So
Jeez.
yeah, there's definitely improvement to make there, and I would love to see um, just a more polished, a little more robust, kind of user-friendly settlement system in the next Elder Scrolls. That's where I want to see it.
Yeah. So Bethesda, if you're listening, we want better equipment and more sensible items picked up
Mhm.
for armor and for weapons. Even just going back to like Fallout 3, I think you did a really good job in Fallout 3, just with the armor. Because like the combat armor in 3 was like that was like the best armor, and you could only find it either like late in the game from like enemies or from specific vendors at certain like camps, like military camps.
Hmm.
So it was like that felt like a really important thing, and it was like statistically it was like some of the best, and it looked pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it was just like just
Whereas here,
mishandled,
every character's walk around with metal plating, and
which was better
and
than combat armor, which made no sense to me, but whatever.
and it was also unfortunate that, I mean, you collect a whole bunch of like scavenger type clothes, and it's like you want to wear a plaid shirt or you want to wear this kind of like
Hmm.
farmer's overalls, and like there's maybe 4 or 5 outfits that can be worn underneath your armor so that you actually look different underneath. Like for me, for 90% of the game, it made no sense to wear anything other than the vault suit because I just upgraded it to have, resistances. And then
Hmm.
it was like, well, there are so few clothing items that allow me to also have armor equipped. So yeah, there was very little allowance made for, kind of wanting to have a character look a certain way.
Yeah. So armor upgrades would be just like armor handling in general would be nice to refine that a little more. The dealing with the settlement people, labeling people, what they're doing, all that jazz. That'd be nice. Uh, I guess they could go either way with the perk system. If they can keep it how it is, it'd be fine. But it doesn't give you. I wouldn't think it gives you as much replayability as if they went back towards 3 and New Vegas.
What's tough is that Elder Scrolls is somewhat immune from that too, if only because like
Yeah.
it's just by virtue of the weapons in that game, playing a bow character versus a magic character versus a melee fighter feels so different already that some replayability is kind of built in. So yeah, I think I would like to see them reuse the perk system versus like a numerical skill system in the next Elder Scrolls because I think it would be
Hmm.
daring on their part to break up an Elder Scrolls formula they've been using since Morrowind.
Sure,
Probably
if they're
earlier
talking
on.
about it. I think it would be nice for like the next Fallout game if they do more the route that CD Projekt Red does or did with The Witcher, where it's focusing more not on like flexibility of a character in terms of like a big range for them, but being more just like this is our character, this is what he is, or this is what she is, and but you can like modify slightly like the certain weapon like the existing perk system that they have in 4. I mean that would be fine, but just to embrace more of like this is the style of person. and not make it seem like, because I mean I know that anybody who's played the previous Fallout games when they're coming into this, they had the expectation of being able to kind of like really change drastically how the character played, because before it was like you built your own character from scratch, and this was the first time that you had a character that had like a purpose and a backstory.
You're right.
So if they commit to that more, I think that'd be good.
Mm-hmm. So. Agreed. I think definitely. Why not? Let's go for it, even in a main entry, because I understand the push to not change too much with a thing that's already successful, but I think they got close with Fallout 4 to making a really riveting main character. It's proven that it can be done. You know, like for all intents and purposes, The Witcher 3 was like a very, very, very personal Elder Scrolls game. In some respects,
in a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I think that'd be good. So definitely, if we haven't ruined the game for you or the story with our discussion and you haven't played it yet, which I don't know why you'd be listening to this anyway, you should go out and play Fallout 4.
Yes.
For sure. Because you can spend endless hours in that game.
It's one of the best games of 2015.
Oh, easily. Probably one of the best games of the decade. I'm going to say probably before the end, unless we get, well, I don't know. That could be a long list now of some of the best games depending on this coming year when it's coming out. But yeah, so thank you for listening to our spoiler cast of Fallout 4. I know we're gonna do a spoiler cast for The Witcher later on too. That's basically the big competitor for Fallout 4 as RPG of the year for most people, or game of the year actually, for a lot of people.
Please look forward to it.
Please look forward to it. Yeah. I think it would be an interesting one to do in the future if we do a comparison for Fallout 4 and Witcher 3, where we just kind of break down both games side by side and kind of go back and forth on which one does better in certain areas. Yeah. Not necessarily pick one over the other, because they're similar and they're very similar and very different in a lot of ways where it's kind of hard. But it'd be an interesting discussion. So I think that would be a good one to have in the future. So you can look forward to those discussions, hopefully, as we move on. Thank you again for listening to our Fallout 4 spoiler cast. And let us know what you thought of Fallout 4 and the story that happened, because not only is this a conversational podcast for those of us involved in it, it's a conversation with you all, and we want to know what you have to say. So let us know in the comments what you thought. If you're still playing Fallout 4, what your favorite parts are.
For spoiling it for you.
Well, you can still be playing it after the story. There's a lot
very
more to
true,
go on.
Very true.
Who's your favorite companion? I'd be interested to know that. Who you had going through the storyline. But yeah, so thanks for listening to episode 11 of PlayStation Fix, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Take care.